Welcome everyone to this information session on the prestigious Rhodes Scholarship Program. My name is Sean Van Koughnett. I am the Associate Vice President and Dean of Students here at McMaster. I'm glad that you could all attend here today to find out more about the scholarship and to hear directly from previous winners of the scholarship who have a history here at McMaster. We're very proud to have a number of Rhodes scholars throughout the history of McMaster, and it just points to the excellence that our students demonstrate here over many decades. I'm going to introduce the panelists for this afternoon's session, and then I'll hand it over to Caitlin Mullarky. Caitlin is an associate professor and associate chair for undergraduate education in the Department of Biochemistry and Biomedical Sciences. She's the Internal Rhodes Selection Committee Chair and a 2009 Rhodes Scholar. Welcome, Caitlin. We also have Tim Davidson, who is a professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, and he was a 1991 Rhodes Scholar. We have Rishi Bansal, a 2023 McMaster Rhodes Scholar, so just this year, obviously. And Nancy Solano is joining us as well from the awards. She's an awards officer in aid and awards here at McMaster, and will help applicants through the process. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here, and I'll hand it over to Caitlin.
Great, thanks, Sean, for that introduction, and welcome everyone. I'm really pleased to see such a large number of attendees, and maybe something that you'll hear me say more than once over the course of this session is my main message is I hope to see your application. Please apply to the internal competition. I know that maybe as you hear a little bit about the process, it may seem intimidating. But I would be remiss if I didn't say I really hope that everyone on this call applies. So as Sean said, my name is Caitlin Mullarky. I've chaired the internal selection committee here at McMaster since 2018. And I'm going to just provide a little bit of an overview of the Rhodes Scholarship. It is a unique scholarship. So some of you, and if we could just toggle to the next slide, I know we have some bullet points that will help reinforce the things that I'm saying. So the Rhodes Scholarship is actually one of the oldest scholarships given for graduate study and undergraduate study. We can talk about that. It has been awarded since the early 1900s. It's arguably one of the most prestigious. I would say it certainly has the most name recognition. And it was established in the will of Cecil Rhodes, who was a British mining magnate. Now, the Rhodes Scholarship is unusual and unique in a few different ways. So the first thing to say about the Rhodes Scholarship is there are around 100 Rhodes Scholars that are selected globally each year. The scholarship is administered by the Rhodes Trust, which was set up in the estate of Cecil Rhodes. And of those 100-ish scholars, they come from different constituencies, and a constituency is a country or a group of countries that gets a certain number of scholarship allocations, and obviously Canada is one of them. And I'll talk a little bit more about the allocations, Canada's allocation, and what that means for you when you apply. Now, there's a lot to say about the history of the Rhodes Scholarship and Cecil Rhodes himself, but I'll keep it brief and say what unites all 100 Rhodes Scholars is they all study at Oxford. And that is unique for a graduate scholarship in that oftentimes when you get money for graduate school or postgraduate education, you can take that money wherever you want to go. But all Rhodes Scholars will come and they will study at Oxford. And the scholarship will fully fund 2 to 3 years of study at Oxford. And that really depends on the degrees that you're pursuing. And again, the rules of tenure are quite complicated, and I'm happy to take questions. Now, the criteria for the Rhodes were also laid out in Cecil Rhodes's will, and they've been I would say, reinterpreted in recent years, but they are based on 4 main criteria, most of which are listed here, which is essentially academic excellence, character, moral force of character, leadership and commitment to service. And then what isn't here listed here is energy to use one's talents to the fullest. That historically used to mean through athletics, like sports, varsity sports. That is no longer the case. You essentially have to demonstrate that you lead a really vigorous lifestyle, and part of that lifestyle involves teamwork and working in a team dynamic. Now, as I said, Canada is one of the constituencies of the Rhodes Scholarship. It gets 11 allocations each year. So all across Canada, there are 11 scholarships given. This happens through a decentralized selection process, which makes the Rhodes very uncommonly difficult to advise students on, because the different regions within Canada, the selection committees are all slightly different, and they can all place emphasis in different areas and are made up of different people. Of the 11 scholarships, Ontario gets 2. There's 1 in British Columbia, there's 3 for the Prairies, 2 for Quebec, 2 for the Maritimes, and 1 for Newfoundland and Labrador. Now, for most people on this call, you will apply through Ontario, because you can apply to the province or the group of provinces, either where you will get your degree from, so that will be McMaster, or where you are a resident. So again, for most people, that will be Ontario. It might not be everybody on the call. We've certainly had scholars or finalists each year that have come from different provinces like BC. So if you're a resident of BC, you're actually eligible to apply either to BC or to Ontario. So we'll get into maybe some more of the nitty-gritty details about the application process, but I will hand it over to Nancy to just talk about the general eligibility criteria, and then I would like to talk more about our internal selection process.
Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the eligibility criteria for the Rhodes Scholarship. First, most of you must know that the Rhodes Scholarship consists of multiple stages, and it does have very specific eligibility criteria. So in order to apply for the Rhodes Scholarship endorsement, you do have to have a cumulative average of at least 10.5. You must have obtained an undergraduate degree before taking up the scholarship, except for med students. You must be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident of Canada. And it does have really specific age requirements as well. So you must be 18 to 23 on the 1st of October of this year, or you must be under the age of 27 if you're applying as a mature student, and must have completed your undergraduate degree on or after October 2022. There are more, details about the age requirements on the Rhodes website. But if you have any questions about that, please feel free to ask those today as well. And then, so for the next slide, the application for institutional endorsement opens on award spring, August the 10th, and closes September the 4th. So some of the supporting documentation that you are required for the endorsement application is an academic statement, a personal statement, an academic resume, a McMaster transcript, which does not need to be an official transcript. And you're required to submit 3 reference letters as well. 2 of those references should be people who you've studied under at McMaster. And then just a reminder that for the final application, so if you do move on to the next stage, you're required to submit 6 references in total. So just keep that in mind when you're seeking your referees, that you are going to need 6 in total for the final application.
Yeah, great. Maybe I could just jump in here, Nancy, and
Yep.
say, so as I mentioned, the Rhodes in Ontario, there are 2 scholarships. Now, what happens is, in order to apply to the regional pool in Ontario, you need endorsement from your university. And so that's why we have an internal selection process. And the internal selection process is essentially asking you to complete most of the Rhodes application, with the exception of the full number of reference letters. We require a smaller number of reference letters in the beginning. And then of the internal applicants that we receive, there is an internal selection process, and we endorse a select number of those internal applicants to go onto the regional pool. Of the regional pool, you still need to be selected as a finalist in order to go on to the next stage. So being endorsed by McMaster doesn't guarantee that you're a finalist, although we've had a lot of success in recent years, and I'm happy to speak to historically what the numbers have looked like in the last 4 years. But just that's a 1,000-yard overview of the process. The other thing I want to point out about this internal application is the requirements have changed quite a bit in the last few years. It used to just be that you had to write a personal statement, and that personal statement could be whatever you wanted in whatever format you wanted, talking about whatever your heart desires. That's not the case anymore. So the personal statement, and I encourage you, if you haven't already, the Rhodes Trust does put out an extensive amount of resources on completing the application, from PDFs to videos from scholars. The personal statement actually has prompts now. So when you're going to complete that personal statement, please do be sure to look at the prompts, and I will read them to you aloud. They're not listed here, but in 750 words, you're actually asked to speak to 3 different questions, which are: which Rhodes Scholar quality do you display most strongly? And how are different contexts and people helping you to develop the other qualities? What would you like to learn from and contribute to the Rhodes community in Oxford? And finally, from your place in the world, how will you use your energy and talents to address humanity's pressing challenges? So that is to say that it will take some time to draft that personal statement. You should think carefully about those prompts. And this is a lot different than what has happened in previous years. These prompts were introduced last year. The academic statement is for you to speak to what you wish to study at Oxford. And what's really important about that academic statement, and where there's been particular emphasis in, I would say, the last 5 to 10 years, is having a very compelling reason about why you want to study at Oxford. You want to study global health. Why do you need to do that at Oxford and not McMaster? What's unique about the academic programs, the training experience, the intellectual and otherwise immersive experience about studying at Oxford that you wouldn't get anywhere else? And how does that fit into your life and career goals? The academic resume is 2 pages. So please be sure, if your CV is much longer, which many of you have, very extensive CVs, to keep it to 2 pages, because again, we're really trying to set you up for success in the regional pool, and there the application maximum for the CV is 2 pages. Right, so maybe do we want to move on, and maybe Tim and I can start talking about scholar experiences, and then happy to take any and all of the questions that people have about the application process, the internal application process. Really, I'm thrilled that Rishi's here, because increasingly my experience going through the selection process, and I'm sorry, Tim, is dated and maybe not as I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but I was selected over a decade ago from the US, but Rishi has been through it. He's a McMaster undergraduate student, a McMaster medical student, and everything is very fresh in his mind. And so he is going to be like the absolute best resource for everybody on the call today. And he is about to embark on his Oxford experience. So I don't know, Tim, can I ask you to start first? People
Yeah,
have
well,
gone through,
I can
and
say
then
that
I'll
my experience is even more dated than Caitlin's, and as you may guess from my accent, was not from Canada, in fact, from Australia. I think if I can look at the experiences that I have had over the course of my career, the experience at Oxford stands out from the breadth of people that I met and the extent to which I grew in dimensions that are not purely aligned with my academic interests. And those are things that I really found extraordinary about that experience. To get there, one of the things I realized once I was there was how naive I was in the application process, and how much richer the world was than I had experienced at that time. And so it was a really an amazing moment of growth and exploration for me. So that's why I would very much encourage, like Caitlin said, encourage all of you to apply, because the extent of that growth is just it really was extraordinary. In terms of the application process, I think the certainly in my day, and my impression is that the nature of the personal statement and what it tells a selection committee like us, or a selection committee about the next level, what it tells them about you and how interesting a person you are potentially. I think that is a really important thing, and especially now that it is structured in this particular way, I think thinking through that will be important. I would encourage you to think about how it would enable you to grow. I don't think that certainly in my day, the committee even told me that I was a bit of a diamond in the rough rather than a polished product. And one of the things that encouraged them to select me was the fact that there was potential there, but it was unpolished. And so I think it is helpful to think about how you might grow through the process. How I don't like to put a business type thing on this because this is so it's so esoteric, but what is the value added to you and to the Canadian community for you to have spent 2 or 3 years in Oxford? How would the world be better for that? And I think if you can take that perspective of how the world would be better, or how some community within the world would be better for you having been there, rather than writing a personal statement that says that I will be a much better person for being there, but saying other people will be better for me being there. I think that's something that you may want to think about as you craft a personal statement.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such great advice, Tim, is to think about really how that's going to fit into your life trajectory and the good that you hope to achieve in the world. So thinking not only about how the Rhodes will shape you, but also what you have to offer to the Rhodes. So I'll maybe briefly talk about my experience as a scholar, and then perhaps maybe Rishi can tell us a little bit about himself and his experience, at least in the application process. So when I talk about my experience at Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, and I was there for 4 years. I did a master's degree and a PhD. The word that I always come back to is transformative. And it's transformative in a number of ways. It's transformative intellectually because of the environment of the university. It's transformative socially, and that has a lot to do with, one, the Rhodes community being integrated into this network of individuals that have diverse interests, life experiences that are from all over the globe, but also because of the Oxford collegiate system, where you have your Rhodes friends, but also your college friends, and then you'll have your friends from your department. So it's a very unique experience socially. And then the other thing that I think we've failed to realize about, well, Oxford is a really, really old place, and it's hard for North Americans to wrap their heads around that. The oldest Oxford College was founded in the 1200s. So whereas things to us are old if they're from the 1800s or the 1900s, it's a place that's very much steeped in tradition. And there is like a transformative, I would say, historical element about being in that environment that is also notable. So from my time at Oxford, the experience of being in not only the Rhodes community, but the collegiate system and also the academic departments really transformed how I think about the world, how I think about my own field of studies. And it's something that has been long lasting. Those are still connections and influences that I carry with me today. And there are tremendous opportunities to become involved in lots of different aspects of the university life and also the Rhodes community. But I can go on and on about the things I did and how I spent my time there. But it is, I would encourage everyone as they're thinking about the application, as Tim said, to reflect on how that experience might shape you, right? So what is unique about studying in this place, being immersed in this place, being immersed in this community and these people that will, turn that coal into diamond, I guess, if that's the analogy we're going for. And so I know, Rishi, your lens is pre-Oxford, but if you could just speak a little bit to your experience in the application process and why you were interested in the Rhodes, and you're already set up with your college and what you're going to study. And so maybe if you could share that with everyone, I'm sure that would be very edifying.
Yeah, no, thanks. And, pleasure to provide my very early experience in addition to both of yours. Although I have been to Oxford once before, so I can definitely confirm that it is a beautiful and very culturally rich and historically rich place to be in. Just walking around even is phenomenal. But yeah, my experience so far has mainly been as an applicant. So as Dr. Mullarky mentioned, I did my undergrad and medical school both at McMaster over the last 6 years or so. And I don't know, I think I just decided to apply because I had the fortune of meeting a few people who happened to be Rhodes scholars who were just, really, really phenomenal individuals and doing some really interesting work. And, some had suggested that it's something that I might be interested in. I thought it was a great opportunity, not only to do some graduate education and learn something, but also do it in a place that's so rich in opportunity, so rich in experience, and really gives you the ability to put yourself out there and grow and evolve and sort of find a new horizon, if you will. So I think those are really my main ideas and hopes, I guess, going into the application and applying for the scholarship. And even just in the application process and submitting the multiple essays and contacting all the referees and doing all the things that you have to go through to get through what is certainly a long application is worthwhile in and of itself. I think it provokes a lot of self-reflection and really thinking about what is it that you want to get out of this experience? What is it that you're hoping to get out of the scholarships? And especially since they've now included the prompts, I think it's forced people to really be a lot more self-reflective and make sure that the personal statement that they're writing is actually speaking to those things and speaking to not just why is this a great scholarship and a great opportunity, but how can I use this to contribute something to the world? How how are other people, how is society as a whole going to benefit from me being able to go and get this experience and have this opportunity to, meet all these other amazing, interesting scholars from all around the world and grow from that? How can I use this to then, give something back to the community? So I think it's been really interesting already, and even meeting other people from Ontario who applied, and now starting to meet a few of the other scholars going to the UK this fall. It's a really phenomenal group of people, and I definitely will echo Dr. Mullarky in saying that I would highly encourage everybody to submit an application. You never really know what's going to happen or what you might end up discovering in the process. So it's really not a waste of time, and certainly a good endeavor for the next couple months.
Great, thanks, Rishi. So maybe I know that we are starting to get some questions in the chat. People can also, I think in the webinar, they can't raise their hands and unmute, I don't think. So I guess the questions will still have to come through the chat. I want to say one or two things before I'll start with some sort of frequently asked questions that we get. So preparing to submit an application, the best thing to do is to take some time to think about your academic journey, what you've done so far, and where you're going. And the personal statement and the academic statement are really difficult exercises. They're not something that come easily, and they might take several iterations to get something that you're happy with. But it is a very worthwhile endeavor to stop and think about, what have I done so far? Where am I going? Where do I hope to be in 5 to 10 years? And how am I going to get there? And so even what I hear from applicants all the time is, even if they're not successful, as Rishi has been, it has been a very worthwhile process to undertake, because it has allowed space and time for that self-reflection, which sometimes we don't really necessarily have an impetus to do, that kind of big picture thinking. So it also takes some advanced planning. Obviously, the deadlines are quite tight and the turnaround is quite tight for the internal applications to the final applications. So we do encourage you to have all of your referees lined up. You only need to submit 3 for the initial round, 2 of whom you need to have studied under. So that means you've taken a class with them, you've done research with them, they've been a project supervisor in some capacity. We usually get the question of what makes a good referee, and I'll handle that in maybe in a little bit. The other common questions we get, one that I'll tackle right off the gate, is how many applications do we get for McMaster each year? So how many students from within McMaster apply each year for the internal selection process to be nominated to go forward to that regional pool? It is highly variable. Like I said, I've been chair of this committee since 2018. Roughly, we get between 1 to 2 dozen applicants. I can tell you that we had a winner before Rishi. We had Nina Ashira, who is a 2020 Rhodes Scholar. She is a med student at Mac, but had done her undergrad in the US. We usually see more applications in the years after we have a winner. So I anticipate this year we will have a little bit of bump in applications because Rishi has been successful. We do not have a cap on the number of people we endorse to go forward. However, the selection committee will only endorse people who we think will be successful in the regional competition. And that really is for the benefit of our finalists, right? If we saturate the regional pool and just put everybody forward and there's no distinguishing the different McMaster candidates, it actually isn't beneficial to our finalists. Since 2018, we've had 12 regional finalists. Obviously, from those 12, we've had 2 winners in that time period. In the last 3 years, we have a 100% success rate of endorsed applicants getting an interview for the finals. So the people we put forward are highly successful in actually being selected from that regional pool to come in for the final interviews. which is a testament to, I like to think, two things. The first and most important is the quality of students that we receive in the application process. And then Rishi's a testament to that as well, right? We get very, very strong applicants that we put forward. And the second is that we have a very good internal selection process, right? So the committee is very good at identifying candidates that are going to be successful in that final round. So if we get it, there is no cap. If we feel like 5 people will be competitive and successful out of 20, we will put 5 forward. If it's 10, we'll put 10 forward. We don't like to artificially limit ourselves, but there is a very vigorous internal selection process. So I'm going to look at the chat now and start to ask. Please continue for the questions to come into the chat. The first question is, what things do you recommend one to do in undergrad to make them a better applicant? So what I'll go back to is I don't think, I'm trying to, okay, navigate back. So in thinking about applying, I'll answer this a little bit more generically. In thinking about putting together an application, what would you want to stand out to both the internal selection committee and the eventual regional selection committee? Remember, the Rhodes Scholarship is selecting on 4 very specific criteria. So when you're putting together your application, you need to demonstrate to the committees, I'll use that plurally, that you meet those criteria. So I don't think that, you know, I'm going to kind of shy away from there's like things you can do to stack your CV in order to become a better candidate, because I think that increasingly those individuals are weeded out by some of the selection processes. It's more about demonstrating to the committee that you fulfill the criteria for what makes a good Rhodes candidate, and that you're meeting the academic excellence, the energy to use one's talent to the fullest, leadership and commitment to service. And I don't think that that can be engineered in any way. But for the purpose of your application, you do need to make sure that those things come through. Those things come through in your CV. Those things come through in your reference letters. Those things come through in your personal statement. You need to paint yourself as a well-rounded candidate.
Maybe one thing I can add to that question is somebody said to me when I was applying, and it might have been Matthew actually, who's unfortunately not here today, that the majority of the work that goes into your application and then like becoming a scholar happens within the 5 years before you even decide to apply, because all of the things that you are doing right now, I'm sure, you know, if you're attending this session, I think that automatically means that you're somebody who's interested in looking for, you know, other opportunities to enrich yourself and enrich your learning beyond just, you know, going to class and stuff like that. So all of those things that you're doing to enrich your university experience and be involved in your community and make yourself a more interesting person, all of that is, I think, what you can and should be doing that will eventually, you know, make you a good application for the scholarship.
That's right. That's right. It's well said, Rishi. So there a question here from an international applicant that is not a citizen or permanent resident of Canada. So the Rhodes does have a new constituency, which is called the Global Rhodes. So if your home country, the first thing to say is, if your home country is not part of another Rhodes constituency, you are eligible to apply for what's called the Global Pool. So check what your home country is. It could be the case that maybe there is. But even if you apply to the Global Pool, so the Global Pool is basically any constituency, any place that's not covered by a constituency. So if there's not a constituency that's covered by your home country, then you can apply to the Global Rhodes. That still requires endorsement from McMaster University. So you still would need to submit to our internal pool to be endorsed by the university to be eligible to apply for the Global Pool. So I hope that answers that question. Question here, I'm going to save one of these towards the end. What type of applicant does the scholarship look for? I'll refer again to there's 4 qualities that they're selecting on. So the applicants that will be successful and the candidates that will be successful will be able to demonstrate to the committee that they fulfill those qualities of the Rhodes, what the Rhodes Trust is selecting on. Okay, so question about if you wanted to apply to another region, I'm going to assume that's another Canadian province. The answer is yes, you still need university endorsement. So this is like there's like a 2-stage application process, and all applications in order to go to the regional pool do need endorsement from the university. So all universities across Canada, across the US, across other constituencies have internal application processes like we do, because only a certain number of candidates can be endorsed for the regional pool. Okay, so a question about what happens if you are, so the question is, what happens if you are selected to be endorsed and to go on to be a McMaster endorsed candidate into the regional pool? So the question is there help that we get? And so the committee does meet with endorsed candidates. We give very general feedback. We don't edit essays or copy edit essays or you know, mark up CVs. It's just general feedback of things that are perceptions of their applications and suggestions about how we think they might be able to improve. Obviously, it's up to the candidate to take that advice, to do what they want with the final application. There are some very more strict measures in place now that when you submit your application that you attest that it's your own application. And so we're mindful of giving what I consider to be more high level feedback for a candidate to think about and to digest in terms of submitting their final application. What Rishi can attest to is if you receive an interview, so we'll put forward candidates to the regional pool, around 10 to 12 candidates will be invited to the finalist weekend. From those 10 to 12 finalists, 2 will be selected. If you get an interview to be a finalist, there are other mechanisms that we put in place to help prepare you for that interview. The question about could non-professors who we studied under count as one of 2 references. I'm not exactly clear about what non-professors. I don't know if that just means other instructors, maybe people that don't have faculty appointments, but generally speaking, anybody that you've had an academic experience with, whether that's a research placement, a course, even if they're not a faculty member at this university or they're a faculty member at another university, can write a reference letter. It's more about people knowing you in a specific context rather than do they have a faculty appointment. Question about do you have to, yes, so do you have to apply for the Oxford program you wish to get into separately, as in order to achieve the scholarship, do you first have to be accepted into the Oxford program? Good question. It's a little bit backwards in that you get the scholarship and then you still have to apply to Oxford, but that happens after you get the scholarship. So you don't have to apply to Oxford first. All Oxford programs have several admissions deadlines, and there's at least 2 or 3 that happen after the Rhodes decisions come out, which is in November. So it will be November of 2023. So you would focus on applying to the scholarship first. If you were successful, you would then get instructions on your Oxford program.
I can comment on that briefly. It's actually relatively unique in this regard. Like most other scholarships of this nature require you to first be accepted by the university in order to have your application considered by the scholarship. But I think it's actually fantastic that they do it the other way around, because this way you get the scholarship application out of the way, and then once you're confirmed as a scholar, then they actually really help you through the process of figuring out how to submit your application for the university, the earliest of which is typically the first week of December or so. And then depending on what program you're applying to, I believe most of the medical sciences ones are due in December. And then a lot of the arts and like humanities and history colleges are due sort of in January. So it really does depend on what you end up applying to, but it does happen after you receive the scholarship.
So the question here, what is the minimum requirement of education to apply? I'll address that from maybe two different standpoints, which is you need to either have graduated or be graduating within the year that you receive the scholarship. And so this is going to answer another question that I see pop up, which is that if people who are applying in this application cycle, so will submit to us in September, you need to have received your degree by the end of the academic year. So April, May. If you're not going to get your degree for another year, you're not eligible to apply. So, and then obviously there is a minimum GPA requirement, which is, as Nancy said, a 10.5. Okay, so I think that should answer that question. Okay, so a question about the eligibility criteria. So essentially, it is a little bit confusing. Essentially, if you have followed the, I will say maybe traditional, I've gone to high school and then I've gone right into university, then you need to be 23 by the time you apply. You can't be more than 23 by October 1st of this year. If that doesn't apply to you, maybe you took some time off. Maybe you didn't go right into university, you started university later, you had other life experiences, then you need to meet the age requirement of being under 27. So I hope that answers that person's question, but they can reach out again if that wasn't clear. So essentially, if you've done what the vast majority of high school students that go right into university do, you need to be under 23 or no more than 23. If that doesn't apply to you, then you need to be under 27. So yes, great question about filling out the application and feeling like feeling self-doubt or thoughts that you will never get it. And that I'm here to say that is probably ubiquitous to everyone that applies to the Rhodes. And that's why the first thing I said is I hope that you apply, because when we start to talk about the numbers and the process, it can feel very intimidating and like feel as if, what is the point? It's very competitive. I'm not denying that it's competitive, but it is a worthwhile experience and a worthwhile application process to undertake. So my advice there is that everyone feels that way. I felt that way. I'm sure like Tim and Rishi are nodding here. And if Matthew Jordan, who was a 2016 Rhodes Scholar from McMaster, were here, he would say the same thing. So know that everyone is in the same boat. I think if you think you're going to get this scholarship, you already probably started off on the wrong foot. Right. Can a successful applicant defer attendance at Oxford to complete their current academic program, i.e. medicine? The rules have changed on this recently. The answer to that is no. It used to be the case that you could defer your acceptance. Now the trust is very clear that deferrals are only offered in a very, very narrow set of circumstances. So Rishi obviously finished his medical degree before going to Oxford. Nina, however, our 2020 Rhodes Scholar, was in the middle. She had just finished her first year. And so she is actually on leave from medical school, is doing her PhD, and will go back to medical school. So something to keep in mind. And that's also true of residency, right? If Rishi was in the middle of residency, he would actually have to leave the residency and come back.
Yeah, and in case that's something you're worried about, I would say it's unlikely to be a significant challenge to you. It's actually quite common for Canadian scholars who are in medical school or within their first year of residency to simply take leave from school and then come back. It's generally not an issue, so I wouldn't worry about that.
So question about what can you study at Oxford? The answer really is anything. Historically, most people pursue graduate degrees, master's degrees, or PhDs. You can pursue a second undergraduate degree. That is a minority of scholars, but I'll say when I was at Oxford in my class, I knew 2 or 3 people that were doing second undergraduate degrees. So, you can do an MBA. There are you can do a master's in public policy. So there are some complicated rules about how you can combine degrees and still get the 2 to 3 years of funding, but that's not something I think that we need to worry about at this stage.
Yeah, I think the only thing is they have to be full-time degrees. You
Yeah,
can't
you can't do an MBA in your first year, I don't think.
Yeah.
You have to do an MBA
And
in your
I saw a
second
question, somebody asked if they have MD positions, so I think you can't do a JD or an MD.
year. Yes, and it's important to keep in mind that the medical system and how doctors are qualified in the UK is very different than the US. So in the UK, you apply for medicine when you're 18 and it's a 6-year degree. There is what's called graduate medicine at Oxford, but that is not something that's covered by the Rhodes Trust. Not really such thing as like pursuing an MD. So there's a question, are the prompts the same every year? So the prompts are new as of this year, last year, excuse me, and they haven't changed for this year. So I don't know if they will continue to be the same, but they have been the same.
They changed the wording just ever so slightly, but I think it's actually a positive improvement, and hopefully they'll keep it the way that they are now.
Yeah. There's another specific question about somebody related to the age requirement, and I'm just going to encourage that person to reach out to me directly. So you can email me at my McMaster email address, and I will help you with that one. If you're doing PhD. Okay, so I think the question is, if you're already enrolled in a graduate program, can you still apply if you meet the age criteria for the Rhodes Scholarship? And the answer is yes, you can be already enrolled in a graduate program. There's nothing that prohibits you from doing so. This question asks if you can transfer. That is a little more difficult. It would probably mean pursuing a different degree or putting your studies on hold to pursue a different degree. There's not really such thing as transferring in that capacity. But you can be in a graduate program or have finished a master's degree and still be eligible to apply. Can you pursue a degree in a field that you don't have a formal background in? So one of the criteria for being admitted to Oxford, if you apply to a graduate program in math, there are criteria for what you have done in your undergraduate degree. So if you aren't going to be eligible to actually get into that Oxford program, like for instance, I did my undergraduate degree in biology. I probably would not get into a philosophy program because I didn't have an undergraduate degree in that field. So there are lots of programs that it says a related field of study and you would be eligible for those, but you can't necessarily take a big 180 because you simply wouldn't be admitted to the Oxford program. Is GPA ranked competitively? So obviously there's a minimum GPA that you have to meet to be eligible to apply. And GPA is one thing that we will consider, but not the only thing. Obviously, there's 4 criteria and lots of ways to assess academic excellence. Is it common for scholarship winners to get rejected from the program they apply to after having won the scholarship? The answer is no, it can happen, but it's uncommon. It's uncommon. There are some very, very competitive programs at Oxford that occasionally there are rejections from, but it is the exception and not the rule. If we apply in another country, do we need a McMaster endorsement? Yes. No matter what, you need a McMaster endorsement. Is there a list of programs that Rhodes Scholars can apply for on the Oxford website? or is it any program? It's any program. So maybe Tim, I feel like I did a lot of talking, but I always feel like you do a really great job of discussing how to think about asking people who to be referees and who you should ask to be referees. So
Okay.
to save people from hearing my voice for even longer, which is really also really valuable advice, not only for this scholarship, but thinking about anything to apply for. How do you think about selecting somebody to be a referee?
Okay, so I've thought about this a lot, and the analogy that I've found that is quite useful is the Olympic diving competition. So if you are an Olympic diver, you are given there is a degree of difficulty that multiplies your execution score. So if you do really great execution on a really simple dive, you get a low score, right? If you do a moderate level of execution on a really high degree of difficulty dive, you might get a higher score than a great degree of execution on a low difficulty dive. So I think one of the ways to think about referees is first of all, the referee needs to know you and know who you are, right? They need to be able to write from personal experience of their interaction with you what they are like. However, if you ask your neighbor to do that, the expectation is that the neighbor may know the kids on the street, right? And may say, look, you are really great compared to the other kids on this street, right? Whereas if that person was Tim Cook from Apple, and Tim Cook said, oh, look, this is the best best technical writer I've ever seen, then that carries more weight. However, if Tim Cook writes a letter saying, well, this person wrote me an email and I'm writing this reference letter because they wrote me an email, that's a 0 score on the execution, right? So I think you need to be able to pick people who know you and could talk, who have stature to be able to assess your potential on as broad a scale as you can. So somebody asked a question about non-professors or non-academic referees. So I think this is where you need to think about stature and what they can write. So if this is somebody that you have worked very closely with in an area that is really tied to your personal statement, and they can really attest to that, then that would be fabulous. But if this was a master's student who supervised you while you did a summer research project, then that would not really carry the same kind of weight. The expectation is that maybe you would have had the professor write that reference letter in that situation. So I think you need to think about the depth of the personal connection that the referee can write and the stature that they hold and their ability to be able to place your contributions in a broad context. I hope that's a helpful framing of that. Rishi, do you want to add something into? I know you probably got that spiel from me last year, so.
No, I think it's a very apt analogy, and the only other thing that I always would tell people is that just remember that you're submitting, like, to us internally, you'll submit 3 references, but to the Rhodes committee, you're submitting 6. And so you don't want 6 referees that are all going to essentially say the same thing about you or have reference letters that are going to sound exactly the same. And I don't know if we went too much into this, but like typically you submit character referees and academic referees. And so the academic referees are typically going to mainly focus on what, like, in the situations that they've seen you in a purely academic environment. So that could be within the classroom, or in my case, it was more so related to doing a thesis project with a particular supervisor, as that's also an academic sort of role, whereas the character ones are more so them speaking to your personal qualities, your engagement with the community, extracurricular activities, all those kinds of things. So across the references that you are providing to the committee, you want to make sure that there is a variety of experiences that are being spoken to, and ideally, they're going to be able to show off different aspects of your profile and of yourself. So that, it's not just, I took 3 courses in biochemistry and I got each one of those professors to write me a reference letter, and all that they have to say is that, well, this is obviously an excellent student. But from the perspective of the committee, I think we would like to see and hear more about you, because I'm sure there's more interesting things to hear and to know about than just, your performance in the classroom.
Yeah, I think that personal connection with the referee and having that referee describe that personal connection, I think is going to be is really important in terms of selecting those referees.
So there was a question about the timeline, and I just wanted to kind of just talk a little bit about that. So for the institutional endorsement, the application again opens August the 10th and closes September the 4th. And then the committee reviews the applications and makes the institutional endorsement selections by September the 12th. So if you are selected for institutional endorsement, you'll be notified by September 12th. The final Rhodes application deadline is Thursday, September 28th. So I don't know if Rishi, if you want to kind of talk a little bit about the process after you were selected for institutional endorsement, kind of talk about what the next steps were after that.
Yeah, for sure. So we do, we know it is, obviously a tight turnaround, but I think it's still a good enough amount of time for you to be able to take any feedback that's given by the committee and incorporate it into your application, or think about some, things that you may not have thought about before, and then change anything as you might want to prior to the final submission. But typically, after you find out from the internal committee that you've been selected, you'll have the opportunity to receive some general feedback on your application and the opportunity to revise things and make your account on the Rhodes website and do all of that. The actual submission of the application isn't very difficult. It just requires a lot of documents and things, including an original or like a photocopy or a scanned copy of your birth certificate, which is something that I remember I had to rush home to locate. So just think some like little things like that to keep in mind, but otherwise you have a couple weeks in between there to turn around the application, and it's the same format. It's the same format that you'll be submitting to the regional committee that you'll be submitting to McMaster. So hopefully it'll just be content editing and that kind of thing in between then. And then after that, you can kind of relax for a little while. The regional committee does take some time to go through the considerable number of applications that they received. If you're selected as a finalist, they will let you know, I believe it was late October, early November, something generally around that time. And the time between them letting you know and then actually doing the interview sort of varies between years. I think last year was about 10 days. So it's a pretty quick turnaround, but gives you enough time to, again, just look over your application materials and do some preparation for the interview and that kind of stuff. And obviously we'll provide you with some support in that time as well if you're selected as a finalist. And then there's a finals, weekend. You get called down to most likely into Toronto for like a social evening, and then the interview as well. And that's kind of it for after Mac.
Yep. So some more questions that are in the chat. Does this work for JD as well? Again, keep in mind that the legal degrees are not exactly the same in Canada and the UK. Again, law is something that they qualify for as an undergraduate for in the UK. There are, what is it? The BCL. I feel like a lot of Australians do this degree, Tim. That's
yes,
why
it is. Yes.
There So remember, the UK is Commonwealth, well, we're Commonwealth too, but a lot of other Commonwealth countries qualify their doctors and lawyers as undergraduate degrees. And then there are graduate degrees you can do in law, like one is the BCL, and then there's there's one other that that is escaping me. So there's not like the equivalent of going and doing like law school in the UK after you do your undergrad here. It would be doing a second undergraduate degree, if I know correctly. So just a comment here about building personal connections with professors, and it's difficult, and I agree that it's difficult. But again, going back to what Tim said, the people that know you are able to write those letters the best. So it's about establishing a relationship, whether that's working with this person on a research project or as a TA or going to office hours a lot.
Yeah, I mean, even just sort of saying, look, I don't understand this. Can we have a discussion? And you build a rapport with a professor. And as a professor, that's kind of the exciting part of teaching, is helping somebody understand through that kind of discussion.
And from the student's perspective, I know it can seem intimidating, but every time I've actually went and spoken to some of my professors, you always find that they're more than happy to sort of meet with students and chat about whatever it might be, whether it's related to the course, and then oftentimes it becomes unrelated to the course. So, your professors are interesting and fun people too. So I would encourage you to just, go talk to them, figure out an excuse how to do that, and go from there. And yeah, I think Tim already answered this, but yeah, I think it's very appropriate to ask your references to focus on different things, especially if you know those people in different contexts. Like, you can certainly ask them to speak to, specifically to those experiences and those connections that you've made with them in whatever context that might be.
Yeah, think about the criteria, right? There is a rich set of criteria. So you'd like to have referees that could attest to the alignment of what you've done with those criteria, and that they're not all going to be academic referees.
And I'll note that there's also a quite extensive guidance for referees document that's available on the Rhodes website. And I would encourage you to just have a read through that. And if you're considering asking somebody to be a referee, to send them that document, because it really goes into sort of the different things that they would like to see in a reference letter, because it may not just be like the standard reference that somebody would write if you're applying to, a graduate degree or something to that effect.
The wrong button. There is a question about the social event, and if alcohol is involved at the I guess it's the reception, and I'll look. There might be. I mean, obviously, it is.
I think they serve alcohol if you would like to partake, but it's by no means mandatory. And I think most people that I saw were not necessarily having a drink there, but they just have a bar that's available if anybody would like to.
Yeah. Somebody's asking, Rishi, what are you going to study?
I'm going to be starting a PhD in population health and focusing on clinical trials and such.
Great. So some more questions. If we had a class with a professor who's on the selection committee, are we allowed to ask them for a reference? Usually my advice for that is, I usually do not provide references for in the committee. The advice I give, and Matthew Jordan has been asked this, is we try not to do that for the internal round, but we're happy to do it if you get internal endorsement to do it for the final round. What were conversations that you had that were helpful in preparing your application? Who did you talk to? That's a great question. So again, I think a large part of this process is about being internally self-reflective, but talking to your peers and talking to your academic mentors or other mentors that maybe exist outside of an academic realm, and having those discussions about what do you want to do, and what have you done, what have you been working up to this point, and where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years, and what are the things that you need to do to get there. it is worthwhile to have those conversations with people in your life that know you in a variety of different capacities and whose opinion you trust.
And I think those conversations are interesting outside of whether or not you're applying for the Rhodes Scholarship, right? You know, the ability to sort of sit back and think, okay, what have I done and where am I going? And I think you may learn more about yourself if you ask those questions of yourself and have that as a discussion, rather than saying, I need to study for the Rhodes exam, so can you tell me where I'm going and what I should be doing? So thinking about that on a bigger time scale and a bigger picture might be the right way to approach that. Rishi,
Yeah,
you wanted to jump in there?
Yeah, my advice to people is to be almost like shameless in a sense. In that if there's somebody out there that is doing something that you find interesting, that you would be interested in pursuing, you lose absolutely nothing by sending them an email and asking to have a chat. And I really did an embarrassing amount of that over the last couple of years, like not necessarily specifically for this application, but during a period of time where I was really trying to think about what to do with my career. I did a lot of emailing people and just setting up random, meetings over Zoom or over coffee or whatever, just to ask people about themselves, ask them about their jobs, ask them about what their career is like, and do all those kinds of things, because I think that's really helpful in terms of getting an experienced view on somebody or like on a career that you might be interested in. I think you can learn a lot from that. But I learned equally as much, interestingly enough, staying up until like 2 a.m, talking to my roommates at length about, where our careers might end up one day. So definitely access a diversity of opinions, a diversity of experiences, but don't be afraid to go out there and seek them out and look for them, because they may not just come to you.
One more question here about recommendations. Does study under mean you had to take a course with that professor? No, you could have just worked with them in any sort of it's that they know you in an academic context. So whether maybe you've done a formal research project with them under a course code, a thesis, or you've worked with them over the summer, or you've been involved with them just during the term time, but it's outside of a class setting. It means that they know you in an academic capacity.
Maybe even if you've been a TA for them, like if you've TA'd that would be another one that might fall under that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Or yeah, that's for sure. I was thinking, I mean, depending on the nature of it, or they could be a faculty advisor to, again, some sort of academic endeavor that you're involved in as well.
Yeah. If they're the academic advisor to a club, like a sort of academically orientated club, that might be. I know that's a fairly engineering centric thing, but that might also be something.
It's kind of a twofer, like extracurricular, but it could be academically oriented.
That's right.
That's why I hesitated. I was like,
yeah.
But it could check the boxes for sure.
Yeah.
So the only question I have, so again, as our time is winding down, please apply. I hope to see your application. I mean, I guess, I'll lean on like a classically Canadian quote, which is a Wayne Gretzky, miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So you don't have a shot unless you put an application in this context. The last question I see here is sharing a favorite memory at Oxford. And I'm going to look to maybe Tim. It's hard to pick one.
Yeah.
There's a lot of unique things.
I think it is sitting down to dinner in a rented house with some really interesting people to talk to.
Yeah.
And I know that's really amorphous, and I did it, twice a week for like 3 years, but just the quality of conversations that you can have over dinner about important things and about stupid stuff is just it was just really enriching. And that's the connection with those people is what I've taken away.
Yeah, I was gonna say something not unsimilar, which is I was a member of Trinity College, and all Oxford colleges are beautiful and have lots of gardens and lawns. But Trinity has a very iconic lawn, and I say that it's iconic because most colleges have walled off gardens and you can't see inside. But Trinity is a tease and has like an iron gate so you can actually see in. And so I think it's similar, sitting on Trinity lawns when the weather is nice for that short period in the summer in Oxford, and just chatting with friends and watching people come by and take pictures of you on the lawn, and just being immersed in that setting. Those are some of my most fond memories of Oxford.
I'll let you guys know next year.
Yes. One final question. Can one of our references be a student who just graduated but was president of a club? Yes, I think that you need to tread carefully with peer references. In certain cases, peers can make great references depending on the capacity that you've known them and worked with them with. But it's a double-edged sword, because it could just be your buddy that's writing you a nice letter. So it really, I would say you have to think carefully about the work that person is familiar with and what they can speak to, and whether they were in a position to be a little more objective or unbiased in their evaluation of you. So it's not a no, but it needs to be done judiciously. Because in certain cases, if you've like co-founded a group and let it, co-founded an organization and let it for 5 years, and this person has seen you grow the organization and get funding and do this, that, and the other, they could be very, very good. But if it's just a friend that's just been another executive as part of the club, might not be the best, or a member of the club. So I think we covered a lot of ground. I will put my, or I don't know if can I put my, no, I can't put, people can reach out to me via my McMaster email, which you can find if you just type in my name.
I think it was on the front,
Was
Nancy.
it? Okay.
It's on the front,
if you have
on the first slide or the second slide, I think there was a slide with our contact information on it.
yes.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong.
That's
You know
okay.
what?
Okay.
We will share your email when we send out the recording to all the attendees. I will share your email and my email as well.
Perfect. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for attending, and I look forward to reading your applications in September. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Rishi. Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks,
All
everyone.
right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
I don't know.